Good afternoon. Good evening. It is on. All right. Good evening. It's good for us to be here. We've got just a couple of announcements. There is. Where's my clicker? There's my clicker. Oh, that. You know what's not on back is that deal back there, which that will need to be on. Oh, it is on. Somebody's way ahead of me. All right. Okay. Thank you. So Courtney's in Honduras with like 50 kids from Are there other announcements we need to make tonight? Okay.
Let's pray. Holy Father, hallowed be your name. Your will be done, and we pray that tonight as we study your will, that we can make application, that you'd be with Justin and Jason as they present your word, and we pray that we might understand and find things that we can do to draw ourselves closer to you and to each other. Father, we do pray that you'd be with some of our number that have fallen and have injury, that you'd be with Nadine and be with Nancy. That you'd also be with Nadine's grandson-in-law, Jake, in the issue he's having. Pray that you would watch over him. Be with Kathy as she has her eye surgery coming up, and that it might do just what's needed. Father, we do thank you for all the ways that you have provided. We're thankful for the many years that you've blessed the church here. We do pray, Father, that you would guide us as we look for the right family to join us and help us with the work. That you will guide us in the ways that we should go and help us find the family that you prepared to come here and provide and to help us to help others to know your love. We pray in your Son's name. Amen.
Go ahead and open your books to 144. We'll sing this song and be dismissed for class. 144.
Oh, worship the King, all glorious above, and gratefully sing his wonderful love. Our shield and defender, the ancient of days, pavilioned in splendor and girded with praise. Thy bountiful care, what tongue can recite? It breathes in the air, it shines.
gotta turn this on. Check, test, 1, 2. Check, test, 1, 2. I'll quit pushing buttons. Except the ones I'm supposed to push. I tried to help. Didn't go well. Well, any updates? How's the house?
It's coming. Almost, I mean, I still have the bottom side to hang drywall, so hopefully I got some guys coming this weekend to help me do that. So before too long, I'll be doing nothing but drywall mud, so I'll just live in the mud.
Okay. What?
But
With all the rain, you found any leaks?
yes,
Oh, I didn't think. Oh, sorry about that. I was hoping the answer would be no.
well, I found one today that was not necessarily super concerning, but it's like I don't know how to fix it, so it's just going to be one of those things like anytime it rains, you just got to like put the fan in there. I mean, so who knows? 40
Yeah.
years, man. Yeah.
Get a-
50 years, maybe
get a good
60.
fan.
I don't know. I'm 26 or something. Maybe 20. No, I'm 26. So maybe 60 years. Who knows?
Okay. Well, good luck. All right. What's that? Just fix it.
Well, I have to tear out the door, and I don't know how to fix what's wrong. But anyways, I'll figure it out someday. Maybe I'll ask someone smarter than me.
It's a good place to start. All right. Last week we started Judges, and we got through an introduction and part of chapter 1. So what would you say? Why are you already giggling?
Look at the next slide.
Okay. Well, I'm going to let you explain the next slide in a minute.
Okay.
So we talked about just introductory stuff as we get into the text, more into the text of Judges. Kind of the primary thing from the introduction, I think, is the cycle of things that happens in the book of Judges that we'll see. Cycle of people doing well for a time and then falling away from God. God sending punishment through an enemy, and then the people crying out, a judge being raised up, the people returning to God and living faithfully for a time, but then that judge would die, and shortly thereafter the people would go back into sin. We're going to see that cycle start tonight, as well as that cycle basically being laid out in chapter 2, if we make it that far to the end of chapter 2, where that cycle is told to us. This is what happens during this period of time, and then we get just kind of a history of the things that happened during that time. So it's interesting that it's Judges chapter 1 and 2 really serve as an introduction for the chapters that follow about what's going to take place. So we're in the midst of that introduction now, having seen that there was some partial successes taking place early in Judges chapter 1. They were having some success with some of the conquest of the land, taking some cities and some areas and settling in those areas. But they were also perhaps having not full success. And then as we get into chapter 1, we're going to see less success as they don't complete the task that God sets before them. So, all right, here's
the summary, all right? So the
Okay.
first conquest, the first campaign, Judah went south, found this guy, and cut his thumbs off. And 2 thumbs down.
And
So
his
his
big
thumbs
toes.
hit the ground, and it was 2 thumbs down. He left a bad review, negative review, but it was what God told him to do. So the first little bit, we start seeing, hey, Judah is doing essentially as they're told. They're doing some good stuff. Then they go and they capture a whole bunch of desert towns, and this lady, Caleb's, I believe, Caleb's niece, I believe. Let me see here. No, it's Caleb's daughter. Just kidding. It's Caleb's daughter who marries his nephew. That's where it's getting backwards. But it's Caleb's daughter who marries his nephew, Othniel. Othniel comes in and takes over some stuff and does some good things. And his daughter, I don't know if her name is given, but I'll give him Axa. Now, what wonderful names. But this woman, Axa, says, hey, Dad, will you give me some springs of water? Because this is just desert ground. So there's the woman in the wells. And then the last one is the ending of Judah's campaign is when they get down into basically where the Philistines live. They can take over the high ground, as it were, but they can't get down into the valleys because they had iron chariots. And we talked a little bit about that. That might be Judah's main stopping point, where they were supposed to take over all these people, and yet they did not continue in faith, saying, hey, man, even God with us can take over and can destroy these weapons of war that they're arrayed against us. Again, but we talked a little bit about that. That might be us looking down our noses a little bit. You know, it wasn't me that was facing down a chariot when I'm just got my spear in hand, but they, what verse is that? Verse 20, no, verse 20, just kidding, not 20, man.
19?
19. I was looking at 19. And the Lord was with Judah. He took possession of the hill country. They could not drive out the inhabitants of the plains because they had chariots of iron. And so, you know, it said he could not do this. Was that because of lack of faith? Was that because of lack of trying? I don't necessarily know, but the chariots were not something that they had, so they thought, well, we can't beat these guys. So that was the major summary of chapter 1 of what's been going on. They're winning quite a bit, cutting thumbs off, getting some springs of water, but the chariots stop them.
Okay, so there you go. We've got our mnemonics or word picture there to help us remember some of the events from chapter 1. And that kind of catches us up with what we saw last week, and now we're ready for verses 22 to 26 to continue with somewhat part of the successful conquest before we get into some other.
Well, I better read off that. Mine's a different version. Likewise, the house of Joseph went up against Bethel, and the Lord was with him. The house of Joseph spied out Bethel. Now the name of the city was formerly Luz. The spies saw a man coming out of the city. They said to him, please show us the entrance to the city, and we'll treat you kindly. So he showed them the entrance to the city. They struck the city with the edge of the sword, but they let the man and all his family go free. The man went into the land of the Hittites and built a city and named it Luz, which is its name to this day.
Okay, so let's see. I should know where that's at. Went into the...
This is the house of Joseph, so it's going to be somewhere in this area, but I'm not
The
exactly
house,
sure.
yeah, so it would be right in the middle, and I don't see Luz on there. I thought it was. I thought that's why I put that map there. Well, how's that for organized? But the house of Joseph, let's talk about that for a moment. The house of, here you go. Your map puts it on there. There's kind of that area there. You marked it for us. The house of Joseph, how often do we read about the tribal land of Joseph as a tribal land? 0. So what's going on as we enter the promised land, and we've got a reference to the house of Joseph? Who would that be? Okay, Ephraim and Manasseh, if you remember back to when Jacob was passing away, when Israel was ready to die and he was blessing his sons, he called Joseph in and he said, I'm not going to bless you. I'm claiming your 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, as my sons, and I'm blessing them in your stead. Now, who was the oldest of the 2? You got 50-50 shot. Manasseh was the oldest, and so who should get the best blessing? But what did Israel do? Crossed his hands, and he put his right hand on Ephraim's head and his left hand on Manasseh's head. So Ephraim got the blessing. So when we say the house of Joseph, who are we talking about? Ephraim. Ephraim is the one that we're talking about. Okay, not that Manasseh wasn't also claimed as that son, but he's the lesser of the 2. And so Joseph is the one. So when we're talking about lands that would be ascribed to the house of Joseph, it would be Ephraim, and that's the area that we're talking about here. So their conquest is going well. By the way, what awesome leader that led them into the promised land is of the house of Ephraim? Joshua is an Ephraimite. So so this is Joshua's territory that we're talking about. He would have been the leader of this clan at that time, the leader of this tribe. So that's the area where all this is taking place. And there's another map. It doesn't have Luz on it either.
No, well,
Why did you put
Bethel
all
is the
these
new
maps?
name.
Oh, Bethel. Bethel is the new name. Okay, there you go. Bethel.
Well, even your last map had Bethel on there.
Okay, well, there it is right there.
That's where I circled
Okay.
it on my
You're
triangle thing.
so much ahead of me. All right, so Bethel is there, and this is the area that we're talking about. And I like the guy. They kicked him out, and or they make the deal with the guy that they're not going to take him on because he gives them the way into the city, and he goes off to where they won't bother him anymore, and he makes a new city with the same name. I like that story. Yeah, I think it's just kind of ironic.
We'll treat you kindly and kick you out of your home.
Yeah,
But anyways, so my funny thought here was you've heard about open door policies, and I thought that would be fitting for this town. Hey, just show us the door and we'll come on in. So, the inhabitants of Luz, it used to be Luz, said, all right, here's the door, and let him in. So that's where I thought would be funny to remember this one by, because they let him walk through the front door.
All right, so far up till now, we've seen pretty much some success, a little, maybe some hiccups here and there, but overall, everything that we've read up to this point has been success. So now let's shift gears a bit. 27 to 36.
But Manasseh did not take possession of Beth-shean and its villages, or Tanakh and its villages, or the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, or the inhabitants of Ibleam and its villages, and or the inhabitants of Megiddo and its villages, or so the Canaanites persisted living in that land. It came about when Israel became strong that they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but they did not drive them out completely. Ephraim did not drive out the Canaanites who were living in Gezer, so the Canaanites lived in Gezer among them. Zebulun did not drive out the inhabitants of Kitron or the inhabitants of Nahalol, so that the Canaanites lived among them and became subject to forced labor. Asher did not drive out the inhabitants of Akko or the inhabitants of Sidon or of Oleb or of Akzib or of Helba or Aphik or of Rahab. So the Asherites lived among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land, for they did not drive them out. Naphtali did not drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh or the inhabitants of Beth Anath, but lived among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land, and the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh and Beth Anah became forced labor for them. Then the Amorites forced the sons of Dan into the hill country, for they did not allow them to come down the valley, yet the Amorites persisted in living in Mount Perez, in Ahalon, and in Shalib. But when the power of the house of Joseph grew strong, they became forced labor. The border of the Amorites ran from the ascent of Achrabim, from Selah and upward.
So there will be a quiz. There won't be a quiz, I meant to say. Yeah, spelling and pronunciation. Yeah, good job,
I've
man.
already failed.
Yeah, good job. That was a tough read. And how many of those places, like, even ring a bell, really, or if they more than ring a bell, do they mean something to us? Like, oh yeah, I know something about that place or where it is. Maybe one or two. I know Sidon. That figures in prominently to some historical stuff. Megiddo is another one. Some of those names, I remember reading them in other places, but really don't mean much to me. But to the people of ancient times and to the people that settled in this area, it would have been, if we read a history of the state of Kansas, for those of us that have lived in Kansas all or most of our lives, we might read about something about Pittsburgh, Kansas. And I don't know a lot about Pittsburgh, Kansas, but I know where it is. I know which direction I'd go to get there. I could drive to it. I could tell you maybe one or two things about it. But and so for the people that were from that area that had that history, that those names all would have meant something to them. They all would have been familiar with those things. So we're not talking about just a small, localized, little pocket, one or two here or there. We're talking about widespread. I mean, this was pervasive throughout the land, especially it seems like the further north they went. And I wonder if that's not just a simple geographical thing, because the further south you go, the more desert it is, and probably fewer settled tribes, settled people living there, more nomadic tribes that would have been just kind of around that area. But as you went further north and the land became more fertile, there were settled villages, there were settled people living there, and it would have been harder, first of all, more people, second of all, harder to drive them out of established homes. Go ahead.
Well, I found it interesting. You know, I've known a lot of these people from verse 29. It says Ephraim did not drive out the Canaanites who lived in Gezer. There's been a lot of Gezers around here.
Geezers.
Anyway,
You've been holding
I've
on to that
been
one.
holding on to that one. But
right.
here goes. So I tried to draw on the map just a few of the different towns that actually show up from Manasseh, obviously, and I put what do we call those? The tribes next to them. I know that's really far away, but Manasseh is, you know, the strip going at the top on the right and the strip on the left. West and East Manasseh. Megiddo is that town. Obviously, there's a brown mark over there. And then on the brown side over here, about the border of Gad and Manasseh, is Beth Shean. And so those are the two places where specifically, here's two of the maps where on both sides of like the main strip of where, you know, the power of the Jews, well, I guess the power of Israel, not the Jews yet, but the power of Israel should be, there's towns on both sides of that. The strip, they've got people there. Let's see here. I couldn't find basically any of the Kitron or Nahalol, laugh out loud. I couldn't find that on the map, so I just kind of included over here on that's the right. Zebulun is in that little middle strip, and so there's no like actual cities in there, but obviously the cities that they're living among are somewhere in there that they didn't drive the people out. Asher did not drive out the inhabitants of all of these things, and the pink mark up at the very top is where Sidon is. Now, there's a few different, obviously historical deals from Tyre and Sidon, specifically that Sidon and Tyre, they kind of become a sister cities kind of a thing, and Tyre's a giant fortress floating at sea, and that's a really big deal for different conquests that they can take over Sidon, but they can't get Tyre, because Tyre, they just like float out on the sea, and then they sink into ships to get close. So that's a interesting place, but up there at the very top, again, there's Asher, and then in your right map, Asher at the very top is Tyre and Sidon, and so that's one of the places where they didn't get driven out, and then there's Gezer in blue. But, I mean, you look at the map on the right side, every single one of them, especially up in the north, as Jason was saying, I mean, you look at that entire section. I mean, if it's an iceberg, the entire tip, every single one of them failed to drive out people. Naphtali, Zebulun, Asher, and Manasseh are the three, or the five that are named, and those are all the northern tip. Now, obviously, there's some still stuff going on down in the south, but everyone in the north failed to do what they should have done. Yep. And, the Amorites pressed the people of Dan back into the hill country, and that's interesting because Dan is going to decide, we don't like it here anymore, and they're going to run away, all the way up there to, in the left map, in the top right, it says Dan Laish. That's where they're going to migrate to. They were in your right map, underneath Benjamin and Ephraim, right there. They're going to run all the way to the northwest, or northeast rather, way up there to Dan. They're going to make a new place up there at the end of the book of Judges because they don't like where they're at. And funny enough, that's down in that dotted line is where David will come from Bethlehem to go fight Goliath down there on that dotted line for Philistia. So other fun, interesting, I think, fun facts about the area and things going on. But they started failing, and they failed big time. And, go ahead, Johnny.
Do we assume at this point in time that they are no longer fighting as a group, but they are fighting as individual tribes?
I think isn't it kind of at the end of Joshua when they do, it does seem like the primary conquest is completed. They've defeated the big armies, and then it kind of becomes a thing of the tribes are supposed to take their individual areas and kind of clean everything out. We saw last week in some of the things that we had a few of the tribes here and there teaming up to clear out some specific areas. So it does seem to be more localized. And I think we'll see that in chapter 2. We see a hint at that as well on at one point it says Joshua dismisses them to take possession of their land. And I have that in my notes for chapter 2 whenever we get to it, but I can't remember what verse it is right now. But it specifically says that, Joshua dismisses them and they're supposed to take possession of the land, and they don't do that. And that kind of brings up another comment about all of these things. Verse, back to chapter 1, verse 27, Manasseh did not take possession. Verse 29, neither did Ephraim drive out. Zebulun did not drive out. Asher did not drive out. Doesn't say they couldn't, it says they didn't. And whatever the reasons are, whether they were just tired of battles and they wanted to settle and be done with it, or whether they kind of fell in love with this idea of having people subservient to them, because it does seem that they were counting it as a success that they were subduing these people and making them their servants. And that kind of, I could understand the appeal of that, even though that's not what God says for them to do. So whether it's a combination of those things, or they just felt like, hey, we got close enough and that's all we need to do, so we don't need to go any further. Whatever the reasoning behind it is, they don't finish the job that God commanded them to finish, that God saw them start. So so I have some things about that at the end of chapter 2 as well.
Thinking back to the time of Joshua, that was when the intention was conquest, like take all this over, so then when the Israelites settled in, there really shouldn't be a reason for them to be fighting if they had done things according to what God intended. Is that
well, I don't know that the first part of the conquest, when you go in and do the primary military campaigns where they're fighting the big battles with the combined forces of some of the cities that get together and armies that get together to stand against them, those are grand scale battles. And then there's going to be some cleanup to do after that. And I think that's kind of the part that we see them at the beginning of Judges, where they have the opportunity. They have the numbers, they have the ability, they have God on their side. They should be able to go in as individual tribes and kind of clean everything out. And that's where they don't. So in Joshua there are mentions, especially towards the end, where it says, but they didn't, they took possession of this land, but they didn't drive out these, and they didn't drive out those. And so, again, I think this kind of gets into a textual concern, or textual, way of looking at things. Joshua, who compiled the information for us for Joshua and for Judges? We talked about that last week. The Judges was compiled after all of this has taken place, with a rearward-looking view, saying, well, here are the things that took place. See how this doesn't fit with what God said to do? God said to clean them out, and they didn't do it. They're not writing that in real time as it's happening. They're looking back on that. So with Joshua, I think some of that may have that perspective as well, that the story of Joshua is that we did these grand battles, but here's a place where they should have gone further, they should have completed, and they didn't. Chuck.
Was Joshua, do we know, was Joshua still alive whenever this was, when they're talking about these tribes that didn't drive out the Canaanites? Was Joshua still alive when this happened? Do we know anything about that?
Well, I think that's a good question, and I'm not sure that I can answer that definitively, because Joshua dies at the end of Joshua chapter 24, and then Judges chapter 1. Now it came about after the death of Joshua, so there's another death of Joshua, and Joshua's going to die again in chapter 2. So Joshua dies several times through here. We have recordings of Joshua's death several times here. So exactly where we place that. Now Joshua was presumably, was he the same age as Caleb? Would he have been about 80 years old when they took possession of the land? And so it's 30 years later when he dies at the age of 110. So are the events of the conquest and the first couple of chapters of Judges, is that a 30-year span? I'm not confident enough to be able to date it, to be able to stamp a date on it and tell you how many years that took. So I think it's probably likely that Joshua was alive during most of that, because I don't think we're talking about a 30-year conquest. I think most of this takes place probably within a couple of years. That's my feeling for what it's worth, which may not be much. So, so yeah, good question, and one that I don't know that I can answer real well. But I sure like to speculate.
I think I
Throw it
found what
at
I
me.
was looking for. At the end of Joshua 11, it talks about Joshua, they cleared here, they cleared there, they put, in verse 19 says there was no peace except with the Hivites of Gibeon, like, remember the Gibeonite story? And then in verse 21, he's still destroying, and there was none of that left. And he took the whole land, in verse 23, he took the whole land. So, I mean, at that point, it's probably like you said about having smaller bands of people that they still needed to drive out, maybe.
And I've always liked Joshua 13:1. Now Joshua was old and advanced in years when the Lord said to him, "You are old and advanced in years." Okay. Caleb is 85 in Joshua chapter 10. Joshua chapter 14, verse 10. Sorry, I get distracted. Okay. Lots of stuff doesn't get done at the end of chapter 1. That's what we tried to say, 15 minutes ago. Lots of stuff that was supposed to get done didn't get done. And whose fault is it? It's theirs. It's not God's fault. They had the opportunity, they had the ability, and they didn't do it. So what does that mean then? We've just entered the promised land. God has given to us the land that he promised. He's making good on the covenant that he made with Abraham, and he brings them into the promised land, and the very first thing they do is not do what they're supposed to do. So how does that bode for what takes place next?
They need to come to Jesus meeting.
That's a little ways down the road, but it's coming, and I'm thankful it does. All right. So failures, this is what we just summarized here. Failures of conquest and Judges chapter 1 and 2 really serve, it's setting us up. It's just leading us right into this whole cycle of the Judges stuff. So Judges chapter 2.
Oh, and what did I say? They had to come to Jesus meeting, and here comes, an angel of the Lord to give it to them.
There you go.
They didn't do it, so now here comes the angel of the Lord. Verse 1, Now the angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochim, and he said, I brought you out of Egypt and led you into the land which I have sworn to your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you. And as for you, you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall tear down their altars, but you have not obeyed me. What is this you have done? Therefore I also said, I will not drive them out before you, but they will become as thorns in your sides, and their gods will be a snare to you. When the angel of the Lord spoke these words to all the sons of Israel, they lifted up their voices and wept. So they named that place Bochim, and there they sacrificed to the Lord.
All right. I'm thankful for the arrows you've been sticking in there. You have to teach me how to make arrows, because I keep putting the maps on there and then try to remember where stuff is. So there's Bochim, and Gilgal's right below it. Yeah.
We can kind of read it back there.
Can kind of read it back there. Well, the arrow's pointing at it. And I don't know. I thought that was a cool looking map too, but I didn't know how to show up. Ephraim is right there in the middle. And that's where we're talking about. That's Joshua's, that's the place where Joshua would have had his inheritance. And so it's kind of the center, the hub right now of things. What got placed in that area at Shiloh? Tabernacle was at Shiloh. So that's the place where the people went for their festivals. That's the kind of the epicenter of their fellowship of their congregation right now. So the angel of the Lord appears to them there. The word Bokim, anybody got a footnote for that, what that means?
Weepers.
Weepers.
First read as weapons, but no, it's weepers.
Is weepers. And so, you know how they name things after significant events take place there, and they named that location Weepers because that's where they heard that they were facing the judgment of God because of their sin, because of their lack of follow-through on what God had commanded them to do. And so it's interesting that I don't know, it's not like they say, oh, you wanted us to completely take everybody out? Okay, we'll go do that. They don't have that. It doesn't seem like they say, oh, well, let us go finish what we started then. You know, and sometimes we take that attitude, or we have that idea of like, oh, I have students all the time, oh, you wanted me to do all those problems? Well, I'll do it real quick. And they want me just to give the assignment back and say, oh, okay, well, here, you know, yeah, I'm sorry you misunderstood me. But no, you don't get a good grade on the assignment now. You didn't finish it. You left them blank. And that's what they've done. They've left them blank, and now they don't even ask for the opportunity to go back and finish it. They just accept their consequences and say, okay, this is how we have to live now. This is how we have to be. We're going to accept what God has said. So this go ahead, Greg.
They may have learned the lesson before when they didn't go and take it out the first time before 40 years, and the group said, oh, we'll go do it now, and they said, no, it's too late. So, well, here the angel tells them that they won't be protected if they go. So, yeah, where's that verse? You've disobeyed me, why have you done this? Now, therefore, I will tell you, verse 3, that I will not drive them out before you.
Yeah.
So if they gone, it would have been hooked.
Yeah.
Probably
You had your opportunity, your window of time where I was with you in this battle, and now because you've chosen not to engage in the battle with my help, if you go now, you're on your own. And so, you know, the things that stood out to me in this passage were, first of all, God's faithfulness, that God, you know, recounts for them in verse 1, you know, I swore to your fathers, I said I will never break my covenant with you, and God is keeping his covenant with them, even in the midst of telling them now they have to live with the consequences of their action. That's him keeping his covenant. That's him being faithful to his word. And another, I think, very important lesson for us to learn is that partial obedience is not enough. We don't get to define what obedience is to God. We don't get to tell God, I did most of what you asked me to do, and that's good enough. That never works. Tim?
Kind of classic human, though. They got their chunk of land.
Yeah.
They got, and they're just elated with that, and they forget about the responsibilities and how they got it and who it came from. They just didn't follow through.
Yeah.
Classic people.
Yeah. Don?
It seems like it's reiterating what the end of chapter 24 of Joshua.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, you know, reestablishing what was just ended in chapter 24. Because you go see the same time frame that Joshua lived and where he's going to live at and all that, the same thing.
Yeah.
But it's just setting the book up, setting the story up here is the way I understand it, and getting ready to run with the rest.
I think you're right. The end of chapter 24, or Joshua 24, is a prophetic statement, I think, from Joshua about what the history of the Israelite nation is going to be when he puts before them, you know, will you serve God? And they say, yes. He says, no, you won't. And they say, oh, yes, we will. And he says, oh, no, you won't. And it starts at the very beginning. I mean, it starts with this, you know, this part of the conquest where they've already demonstrated that they are not going to be faithful in the way that God wants them to be. It's a sad commentary, and now they are forced to live with the consequences of their sin. Does it mean that God can't forgive them or won't forgive them of their sins? It's not what that means, but they have to live with the consequences of their sin. And living with the consequences of their sin for them is literally living with these godless pagan people in their midst as constant reminders of we could have had it without this influence. We could have had our land without these people here to lead us astray, but we chose to let them stay. And now they're here with us forever. And so that, that's a constant reminder to them of what they've done.
I didn't put this on the sheet, but I think going with your second point, and trying to, I know we've brought it up a few different times, but I think that it seems like even before this pronouncement of, well, now they're going to be a snare for you. It seems like, let me find those few verses back here. Well, anyways, when it says, verse 28, when Israel, chapter 1, verse 28, says, when Israel grew strong, they put them to labor. And so again, they had the ability, they were equipped to carry it out. God was with them, God allowed them to gain in, even specifically physical might, physical force. They grew strong, and yet, to your second point, partial obedience, I think what got, reading myself into this, what would have gotten me is compromise. Of like, as you were saying at the beginning, it's like, well, God said to come in and take the land. So we've obviously taken it. We're strong enough. We've conquered it. We're the conquerors that we've done this. Now, wouldn't it be a shame if we just had to eradicate all of these people? I've got a mine back home that would be perfectly great if someone could just mine it for me. I've got some donkeys that I need tended for, and so maybe they could do this for me. I've got some bricks I need made. Hey, you remember when we were slaves? Let's make these guys build bricks. And so they started, at least in my mind, pulling all this together. They had the ability and the power, and yet they started compromising at the very end with, hey, well, when God says this, he means that we've already accomplished it, and we can now add in our own little addendums to, hey, well, we didn't wipe them out, but they are our slaves now. And so, I read that, again, as many different times throughout here, it will say, and when they grew strong, and when they had the opportunity, and when they grew large enough to carry out the commands of the Lord, they decided to compromise. And yes, I think that there's a little bit of a, well, maybe they're just tired of losing, or not losing, tired of war. But I think just on the other hand, they were greedy. They were looking at, well, I can make all this money and I can have an easy life. Yes, the land is flowing with milk and honey, but wouldn't it be so great if I didn't even have to milk the cows or cut the honey hive? I don't know how to make honey. Wouldn't it be nice if someone else did that for me and I got to sit on the beach with, in my beach chairs? Wouldn't it be so nice if I had an easy life? Wouldn't it be so nice if I could use these things that God has said, these are for me, or that this is how you should do it? And I'll just kind of, I think you kind of see the Achan attitude here of like, well, just a little bit left over for me, God. That's going to be enough. That's okay. That's God, we've done most of the things you said, but not this one. And I think that is a common human condition where we start to see things. Well, God has said that I should worship him like this, or God has said that I should serve in this capacity, or God has said that this is the way his church should be run. But I really like, or I really think, or I really just, if we move some things around and we start to slowly compromise those values away, those statements that God has made, and we start to come up with our own little ideas. And I think that is a timeless truth that we all struggle with, that yes, you can see in the pages of the scripture what's going on, but even in churches today that are slowly compromising truth because they feel like, or they want, or they have some other method or some other means. And it's like, well, if I just take this thing of God and just slowly bend it, well, by the time you've bent it 6 different ways, you have something that's totally off. And I think that is something that we all will deal with every day as we try to walk in faith.
I think you're right. I like it. I like your description. I don't like doing it. I like your description of it. All right. Judges 2, verse 6 through 10.
When Joshua had dismissed the people, the sons of Israel went each to his inheritance to possess the land. The people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who survived Joshua, who had seen all the great work of the Lord, which he had done for Israel. Then Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. They buried him in the territory of his inheritance in Timnath-Heres, in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gash. All that generation also were gathered to their fathers, and there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord, nor yet the work which he had done for Israel.
All right, so they were dismissed. And Joshua dismisses the people at the end of the book of Joshua, chapter 24. That's his whole statement of who choose you this day whom you will serve. That's him dismissing the people, and that whole exchange with them. So how long does he have left of his life before, was he 109 and 11 months when he did that, and he's at the very end of his life, or was he 92 and he still had 20 years left to live? I don't know. And so, but what we read there at the end of or in Judges chapter 2 coincides with the events of Joshua chapter 24. And then he dismisses them to possess the land. That's not to go kick your feet up and enjoy the fruits of your labors. That's to go get the job done. That's to go take possession of the land. We've done the big work. We've conquered the armies. Now it's time to go clean house, to clean everything out. And so he dismisses them for the purpose of finishing the job that they have started together. And this is where it falls apart. This is where it doesn't get completed. And which tells you how quickly it comes true the challenge he put before them. Choose you this day whom you will serve. Oh, we're going to serve the Lord. Really? Are you? Okay, go do it. And what do? They go, don't do it. And it doesn't happen. And so it's immediate that they go and fail to do what they said they were going to do. Now, I think in this passage we have, to some degree, it's interesting to me that all of that I just said, I believe, but then we also have verse 7. The people served the Lord all the days of Joshua. Well, how is that possible? If Joshua was still alive and he brought them into the land for the conquest and he sent them to possess it, but they don't go possess it. What happened what about what was said at just a few verses earlier by the angel who said, you didn't do what you were supposed to do? How is verse 7 true and verses 1, 2, and 3 are true also? Sam?
Seems like the difference is that although they weren't doing it right, they were still serving the one true God. And after this, obviously, if we keep going, you'll see that it says that they begin to serve the Baal. So they start, not only are they incorrectly serving God, they start just disregarding him entirely. They go after someone else, and that's not service to God at all, even if improper.
Okay. And so they still are giving credit to God they're serving God as God, and they're also giving credit to God for bringing them into the land and supplying them with what he has said he would supply them with and keeping his covenant and those kind of things, versus later when they're just blatantly, openly following false gods. Okay? Johnny?
I think it may have to do, even though it doesn't talk about it, your speculation, is that they are still serving at the tabernacle.
Okay.
They are still going to the ark, they're still doing the sacrifices that they're supposed to do at the tabernacle.
Okay. So there's still a central focus for the location of their worship and somebody there to guide them in that through Joshua's influence. Okay.
Thinking about this makes me wonder when it says that they followed, they served the Lord. It says they during the influence of Joshua that they followed the Lord. It makes you wonder if the events that they're talking about in the first chapter, where it talks about that they didn't drive these out, it makes you wonder if this happened after. It makes me wonder now if this happened after Joshua died.
Yeah. I think it's a combination of both. I think there's the things that happen after Joshua dismisses them. And I tend to think that Joshua probably still had a piece of his life left that God allowed him basically to go enjoy his inheritance as one of those that promise was for, about what the land was for. And then he got some time at his inheritance before he passed away. I can't prove that. That's just the way I like to picture it. And so there's things going on around him that he still has some influence over he's still the elder, he's still the figurehead, he's still the leader of the people, even though they are kind of off now to do their own thing. And so I think, that idea of Joshua's legacy, was it Moses' fault when the people grumbled and when the people, rebelled against his leadership and those kind of things? Moses was, a great prophet and a great leader. We don't say it's Moses' fault that the people disobeyed. And here's Joshua. How good of a leader was Joshua? He's pretty good. He's a pretty good leader. He was pretty faithful. He did what he was supposed to do. He led the people the way he was supposed to lead the people. And now, as things start to deteriorate and go the wrong way, do we lay that blame at Joshua's feet that he didn't prepare them well enough for his departure, for his absence? I don't think we do. I don't think what happens after his time of leadership is necessarily his fault. So what is it that goes wrong? What happened? Or I guess we know what happened, but how
It said
did?
they're supposed to teach
Yep.
their children by the wayside,
Yeah.
as they walk along, as they sit.
Yeah. Whose job was it to teach the next generation? Was it Joshua's job? It was not, they didn't have a strong enough Sunday school program, Sabbath school program, I guess. Yeah,
We will serve.
yeah,
Or they didn't make a solid, convicted choice.
We've all heard the phrase, we're one generation away from apostasy,
yeah.
They just didn't have the leadership that continued to teach.
Yeah. So I've always said, I think Joshua, or Judges 2 verse 10 is one of the saddest verses in all the Bible. And it's heartbreaking to think of the loss that takes place in the nation because of one generation's failure to teach the next generation about their history, about God, about his influence over them, about what he gave them, about the covenant, about the promises that he had made, that covenant was leading them towards, about how they inherited the land in the first place. I mean, all of those things that they should have been filling in those details. And how many times along the way do we see in Deuteronomy chapter 6, when your children ask you, here's what you're supposed to tell them. Well, does that mean just a generation of children rose up that never asked any questions, so they never got told? You ever been around a kid? Kids ask questions. And there's opportunities to lead those discussions in a direction that will inform them and teach them. And things like, they crossed the Jordan River, and what were they supposed to do when they crossed the river? Take 12 stones from the middle of the river and do what? Set up a monument with those 12 stones as a reminder, so that you could take your children to that place and show them those stones and tell them the story of crossing into the promised land. And there were all these little things along the way that God prompted them. God gave them the tools to have the opportunities to do the teaching that needed to be done. It's not like God, just kind of set things in motion and sat back and waited to see what was going to happen. And then when they didn't tell the story properly, he blamed them for it. He gave them the story, first of all, and then he gave them tools and opportunities and instructions on how to teach that story. And yet they failed. They didn't do it. And so the consequences are stark. They are eternal for what takes place next, and it's a tragic thing. You want to ramble for a minute?
Well, not necessarily anything that I haven't said yet, but I mean, I think that that lost generation is really difficult because, as has been mentioned, I mean, it just takes one, and it's something that we are looking at, well, we as in me and Lindsay are looking at, is that we're now parents. Obviously, we haven't our little son hasn't been born yet, but we need to be purposeful in the way that we teach our children, because it's not necessarily, we'll put it this way, the term lost to me, and that's why I put it up there, it's a lost generation, is because they haven't been given direction, they haven't been given guidance. And it's kind of, as Jason was saying, it wasn't that they on one hand, it wasn't necessarily the teacher's fault that, but I think that as teachers, you have to understand and what's the word I'm looking for? Be able to guide people, because that's what, at least in my mind, what a teacher is someone that guides someone else. And when the generation is lost, there's many different ways that could come about, but I don't want it to be because I didn't guide properly. And so how can I, I'm a father now, but how as a father, as a preacher, as a teacher of people, how can we guide young people to the truth and into a lasting relationship that will not, they will not choose to turn away, and that we can equip each other well enough to teach the next generation's generation. And I think that's why, in even 1st and 2nd Timothy and into Titus, especially Titus 2, talking about the older generations, not necessarily just the families or the parents, but even the older generations teaching the younger and being a part of that circle, a part of that situation is a great benefit to the church nowadays as well. The final thing that I thought about on this section is, Joshua at the end of Joshua 24 says, "But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." And that brings up, in my mind, a few questions. On one hand, do we have some stories that even in the time of the judges, there were faithful people, faithful families, faithful individuals? That's the entire book of Ruth. And there are a few other ones that I wouldn't say any of the other people in the book of Judges are all that righteous. But there are some of them that are attempting to follow after God, and they do it horribly, and I don't think that they do it right at all. But it feels like there are some that do that. But if you think about Joshua, so I'm not saying that there couldn't be just a remnant of people in Israel that truly, truly serve God, and that's Joshua's family. But on the other hand, not even, at least the way I see it, not even Joshua's family was invincible, it's not the right word. Immune is the word. Not even Joshua's family was immune to these kind of things. Not even our families are immune to this kind of thing. Even the greatest leader, for him and his house, and maybe that was the people that were alive today, as it kind of says there in chapter 2, the people that are alive today, that's my house, and they're going to serve the Lord. But what about the house to come? What about the next house? I mean, I guess you could see Joshua and maybe his family is continuously faithful and not unfaithful. But I think it's just as much true that his family could be some of the ones that walk off into apostasy like this.
I think you may have a point, though, that there could be remnants, and it wasn't Othniel of Joshua's family. He was his nephew, the first judge to be raised up. Or Caleb, he wasn't Joshua, Caleb's family. And so there were some that were raised up because they were faithful.
And when Elijah thought he was the only one, this is hundreds of years later, but when Elijah thought he was the only one left, and he tells God, "I'm the only one left," and God says, "There's 7,000 you don't know about that I know, that I count as faithful." And so you're right. Even we certainly can't know whether or not there were faithful remnants here and there, if even they in the moment didn't know that there were faithful remnants.
Well, you guys may not be old enough to remember this.
You were there?
But for years in the church, there has been this saying, "Oh, well, those are preachers' kids," because the preachers' kids always acted badly because they were so busy preaching and trying to teach everyone else, they didn't pay attention to their own children.
And on that note.
Yeah. Well, next week, if you want to read ahead, we'll finish out chapter 2, I believe, for sure, and hopefully get into chapter 3.
I'm trying to do what I could on my phone. and got in the car, and I was like, all right, I'll just finish on my laptop, and it was dead. So all those different sized arrows, I couldn't, like, doing it on my phone was incredibly challenging.
I bet.
But,
That's hilarious.
I mean, like, it worked,
Yeah.
but I had to zoom in so hard
Yeah.
to figure out how to make things work. But here we go. Let's see. So like this, you know, on my phone, it's way easier on the deal here.
Yeah.
And it's go, edit this line, edit this line. But you click this little plus button, go down to shapes, and then I can put in an arrow. This is on my phone. I mean, you can do that. There's a little plus
Okay.
button on your laptop too, but you put in an arrow, and then I'm trying